Shabbat Shalom. So what are your feelings towards the Babylonians? No? You don't spend much time thinking about the Babylonians these days? What about the Assyrians? Not Syria, the Assyrians, a couple thousand years ago. No, it doesn't get the blood pumping, doesn't make your blood pressure go up at all. They destroyed our country. Really? You got nothing? Well, and that's exactly right. Because in the Tanakh, in the section of the Nevi'im, they basically say, look, empires got an empire. That's what they do. The Assyrians, yeah, sure, they came in, they carried off the tribes of the north and leveled that area, besieged Jerusalem and everything. But no, it's an empire. Fine. And the Babylonians, fine, they rolled over the Assyrian Empire and the rest of the Middle East. But come on, they're empire builders. That's just what they do. What do you expect from them? And, the only reason that we were in conflict and fell to them was because of the corruption of our own society and God's withdrawal of protection. So you can't really blame them any more than you might blame a bear for doing what the bear does. But the Edomites, well, for them, there are many words that I can't say in the middle of the sanctuary. But the Edomites didn't besiege Jerusalem. The Edomites didn't carry away our people in captivity for 70 years. The Edomites didn't go around building an empire. Why have an entire Haftarah, entire book of the Torah, and Tanakh, in fact, dedicated against them? Why, time and time again, are they held up as the example of the nation that's gonna get it? And by the way, they did, which is why you probably have not heard of the Edomites very recently in the news. What makes the Edomites more a target of our anger and our feelings of rage than the Assyrian and Babylonians, who were the ones that actually built the siege towers and laid waste to our people? What did the Edomites do? They what? They fought to justify. That's more the Amalekites, and the Amalekites were effectively wiped out a long time ago. The Edomites had a different crime for which they are held accountable. Well, first of all, who are the Edomites, historically, according to the book of Genesis? They are the descendants of Esau. And who is Esau? The brother of Jacob. Now, what happened was, during the time of the Babylonian conquest, the Edomites said, oh, Israel, the kingdom of Judah at that time, is going down? Well, then, don't mind if I do. They joined in the looting of the country as it collapsed into the chaos of Babylon. That's it. Right? Someone else lit fire to your house, and your neighbor came in and stole a TV. Which one of them are you more likely to be angry at? The person who burnt your house or the person who took the TV? The person who took the TV. Right? Random arsonist is random arsonist. Sure, I'm not happy about him, but my neighbor took my TV while it was burning down? The betrayal of trust, of what I thought was perhaps tense, but at least a little familial loyalty across that Jordan River between Israel and Edom. How could you do that? The Babylonians, I understand. But you, brother, how could you do that? You see, our feelings of anger or of joy, of happiness or disappointment are almost always proportional to the difference between our expectations and reality. If I expect to be hurt in a car crash as I see the truck coming at me, and somehow miraculously my car just gets totaled, but I'm perfectly fine, I am going to be saying a blessing of thanksgiving. Now, my car is a wreck, but I'm okay. And the difference between what I thought was about to happen a millisecond before it did and how I feel now, that is going to be such a relief that I will be singing joyfully at that moment. On the other hand, If you park your car safely in the middle of a nice parking lot, and you come back out and the back fender is a little crumpled, and it was a new car, and there's no one else around, no note on the window, you are going to be furious. You are going to scream and rant and rage and jump up and down in the middle of the parking lot, or at least do it internally and emotionally, depending upon your predisposition to displays of frustration. You are going to be much more upset than you will be after that near-fatal collision that you walked away from without a scratch. Why? Because you didn't expect your car to be damaged sitting there safely in a parking lot, and so anything that reduced that is causing frustration. If you plan to go in for surgery and you think it's going to be a piece of cake and you come out and you have a lingering after effect, you are going to be very upset. On the other hand, if you go into a surgery thinking it's going to be terrible and you come out with a lingering after effect, you're going to be relieved. It can be the same amount of discomfort after the surgery. But because your expectation in one was that it would be worse and the expectation of the other that it would be better, your reaction to it is going to be significantly different. Same material effect, different emotional response. And that feeling, when it happens between friends, between family, is only magnified above and beyond what it could otherwise be, which is why the Edomites are singled out for such anger and recriminations by the prophets of the Nevi'im. And that might also help us understand the much more serious and long-term implications of the last 11 days of fighting in Israel. Because people will say, so Hamas fired rockets. It's what Hamas does. We don't like it. We don't think it's right. We don't think that it should deserve the free pass that it often gets by many other nationalities and others. But it's what Hamas does. We've come to learn to expect that every few years, the rockets are going to fly, we are going to defend, some people are going to be injured on both sides. It's terrible, it's tragic. We'd like to have a solution to this. We'd like to find a way to stop the rockets and to establish a lasting peace, but we expect it. And so when it happens, we are emotionally prepared for dealing with the repercussions of it. But the riots in Lod, in Akko, in Jaffa, the riots in the shared cities of Israel, where Arabs and Jewish people have lived side by side now for decades, that is a lasting trauma that is going to need to be dealt with for Israel's future in a way much more importantly than what is happening from Gaza or the West Bank. I know that sounds strange because we're always talking about Gaza and the West Bank, the territories, and all of that as being the primary focus of Israel's security. But in fact, Israel's sanity is going to be decided by how she responds to what has happened within her borders, not outside. Because from inside her borders, there are feelings of betrayal. There are feelings of pain. And they are coming from all sides. And that needs to be dealt with. Now, on the one hand, you can say, but how can you possibly even consider feeling something for the people that were rioting, throwing Molotov cocktails, dragging people out of their cars and beating them, which, by the way, happened, all of those, by both Jewish rioters and Arab rioters. Well, if we talk about the Arab situation first, Arabs in Israel have more political, economic, and social freedom than in any other Arab country in the world. They are allowed to vote. They are allowed to get health care. They are allowed to work in any job. They have equal rights under the law. And the law is more democratic than any other Arab nation. That is something that should make a person jump and cheer for joy to be able to live in that country. And routinely, if you were to ask any of the Arabs in Israel if they would rather live in Saudi Arabia or Iran, which technically is not an Arab country but a Muslim country, or live in Egypt, the answer is, of course, absolutely not. Absolutely not. There are Arabs who sit in the Knesset, in Israel's parliament. There are Arabs who sit in the Supreme Court. Arabs are mostly proportionally represented in professions such as medicine and science. they are, for all legal purposes, equal citizens in Israel. So what are they upset about? What are they rioting for? What's the problem? Has anyone actually listened to their grievances? Or have we all just been so stunned by the betrayal that we don't know how to respond? Just out of curiosity, has anyone tried to hear what was behind the incoherent shout of rage? Exactly. Well, let me ask you this. If a member of the U.S. Congress were to stand up and say, Jews are citizens of the United States, for now at least. Jews have representation in the Congress, for now at least. Feeling okay? No, not so good. If people were to say, well, we're building a new neighborhood of this city, but this is going to be a Christian neighborhood. So I'm sorry, you're Jewish, you can't live here. That's okay? No. We've done that here in this country, for those of you who don't remember, and thank God many of us don't remember, but that used to be normal in many parts of the United States. What about swimming pools that don't allow Jews? We're okay with that in the U.S.? No. What about if the U.S. decided to pass a law saying that fundamentally the United States is a Christian nation? No? Well, maybe you're beginning to understand why some of the Arab citizens of Israel are a little ticked off. If you also found out that your schools were less well-funded in your Jewish neighborhoods, if you found out that the policing were not given as much authority or were not given as many resources to fight crime in your neighborhoods, would you also be maybe a little bit disgruntled? Absolutely. Now, would you take to dragging people out of their cars and beating them in the street? Would you go to Molotov cocktails? Would you burn down synagogues or churches in the case of an American upheaval? I swear to God, I hope you would never think of doing such a thing. And just to explain fundamentally why even the most idiotic among us should prevent ourselves from doing that, there was a case of a firebombing in Jaffa where an Arab child was severely injured by an Arab Molotov cocktail thrown into his house because the attacker made a mistake. He thought he was attacking a Jew, but it turned out to be an Arab house. So a child suffers because of his stupidity. And there was a case of a Jewish mob dragging a Jewish man out of his car and beating him because they thought he looked like an Arab. And even though he said, I'm not, they said, oh, yes, you are, and continued the assault. So when we turn to rage and anger and violence, all bets are off on whether you're actually attacking the target of your rage, anger. Because chances are you are going to make mistakes, and you and the person that you attack will suffer for them. Now, on the other hand, was this the right time for the Arabs of Israel to protest what they feel are some of the inequalities within Israel? No. All right, this is like one of the most basic aspects of living in a democracy. When your country is actually suffering a barrage of rockets, is not the time to go out and protest, even peacefully, for other issues within your country. It is a time to join together with your neighbors and to help pick up the rubble, to help provide first aid for the injured, and to help seek solutions to whatever is causing the strife, the conflict, the war. And once that's over, then you turn to your neighbor and say, thank you very much. I'm glad I helped you rebuild your house. I'm glad you helped me rebuild my house. Now let's talk about the zoning laws around here. But unfortunately, they didn't choose that time. And unfortunately, there was a very real possibility, almost a certainty among many, that the grievances that they were trying to air in such a impossibly bad manner and in such impossibly bad timing are going to be swept under the rug. Which is why you could have a member of the Knesset say they're citizens for now at least. The feeling of betrayal is so acute among many of the Jewish Israelis that there are those who are calling that they should have their citizenship stripped away. Because they expressed their anger, in such a ridiculous manner that their citizenship should be removed. Is that what we think should happen? If somebody were to protest incorrectly, wrongly in the United States against a flaw or perceived flaw within our government and society, do we strip their citizenship from them? Do we say you're not American because what you have objected to is too problematic? If someone actually goes out in the street and protests that a law is wrong, even perhaps, let's say, murders a person on the other side, like maybe shooting somebody who's providing abortion because they think that that's wrong, do we take that person and strip them of their citizenship? No, we throw them in jail. We absolutely punish them for the crimes that they have committed. But like it or not, they are still part of the American family. And they still have the right to be in our country, and we have the right to protect ourselves from their violence, but they also have the right to make their statements, just not in the manner that they chose. That is part of how you actually rebuild a country and rebuild trust. You don't fix a problem in your family. When your sister decided not to invite you to her daughter's wedding by never talking to your sister again. If you've ever known a family where somebody has made a decision like that, you'll know it didn't actually make things better in the family. Kicking someone out of the family doesn't actually heal the wounds. The only way the wounds can be healed is by saying, "You have wounded me. I am absolutely beside myself with anger and frustration because of your betrayal. Give me a moment to cool down, and then we're going to talk about exactly what you did, and you're going to tell me why." And it may be at the end of the day that why you did what you did, I still cannot agree with. That I really don't think there's enough there to justify what you did, or even to justify significant changes. It could be, at the end of the day, that perhaps what's going on in Israel is perfectly fine, and the Arab minority is being treated as best as you could ever hope for them to be treated. And if so, great. Or it could be that Israel has made some mistakes. This does happen in the world. This does happen in every country. Our own country of the United States has a history that is built of it fixing the mistakes of previous generations, which has allowed us to reach a better place in our country today than ever before. Doesn't mean that we're done fixing mistakes. It doesn't mean that everyone thinks that all the mistakes that were fixed have stayed fixed. But it is only by hearing the grievances and deciding together whether or not there is something that needs to be done and what it should be, that our country has been able to remain united and whole. And Israel has that same challenge in front of it. It has focused so long on the existential threat from outside of its borders that it has ignored many of the problems within its own country. It is extremely inopportune that these have broken to a head during the most recent conflict, because they are going to be forever linked to that idea, to the conflict outside of its borders. But fundamentally, the rage that we saw was not about Israel versus the West Bank and Gaza. It was about Israel versus itself. And that is something that Israel will need to deal with in order to remain true to the vision that it outlined in its own Declaration of Independence, that it would be a country for all of the people who lived there, a country of freedom, a country of equality, and a country of respect. Israel has done better than all of her neighbors of providing for that for all of its citizens. But that doesn't mean there isn't room for improvement. And that doesn't mean that those who have received it couldn't also take a few extra minutes to recognize that though they may have complaints, they are still very fortunate to be living in Medinat Yisrael. Shabbat Shalom.